If you're trying to conceive and feeling overwhelmed with fertility advice, then this podcast is for you. Welcome to Don't Tell Me to Relax, your fertility podcast and antidote to unhelpful fertility information. I'm Hannah, a fertility acupuncturist, teacher and campaigner for better fertility education. This podcast aims to empower and inform you about your menstrual cycle and fertility. It's basically all that information you didn't get in sex ed at school, with the aim of improving your understanding of your reproductive health and optimizing your fertility. Good morning, everybody, and welcome to this week's episode of Don't Tell Me to Relax. I'm up and at 'em early this morning because today I'm joined by Lucy Lines, all the way from Australia. So Lucy is an independent embryologist, a fertility educator, and an IVF patient advocate. And so when I found Lucy online, I thought she is somebody we need to get on the podcast to talk about because her work is amazing. So Lucy, would you like to introduce yourself and tell us how you came to run your business? And I know you've got a real long experience background in fertility. So can you tell us a little bit about that, please?
Absolutely. And I'll try very hard not to take up the whole half an hour of the podcast. So I started my training as an embryologist way back in the year 2000, having done an undergraduate degree in agricultural science and worked as a vet nurse for a while, implanting embryos and semen in sheep and cows on farms in South Australia. I thought, no, this is not for me. Transferred to Australia to human work and did a postgraduate diploma in reproductive science, and then went on and did my training as a clinical embryologist. And I worked clinically in Australia, then in Sweden, in the UK, back in Australia for a while. And then I moved back to Europe because I got engaged to my British husband who was living in Sweden at the time. And did a locum in Ireland for a while. So I worked clinically a lot. I have a lot of sort of clinical experience of playing with sperm and eggs and making embryos and babies. I then moved sort of sideways a little bit and began working for a company that manufactured products for IVF clinics. So egg collection needles and embryo transfer catheters and dishes that we grow embryos in and culture media and incubators and all this kind of stuff. And I was one of their global customer support embryologists. So I traveled a lot mostly through Eastern Europe, Southern Germany, Austria, Scandinavia and the UK, but also throughout Australia, in and out of lots and lots of clinics, helping them to improve their success rates, obviously using the products that we manufactured. And I did that for 5.5 years and then moved back to Australia and took up a position in a sales and marketing department of an IVF clinic. And I survived in that role for 5.5 years before I was made redundant because they couldn't see the direct financial link between educating GPs and shareholder dividends. So during that sort of career process, I learned 3 really important things. One is that GPs don't know much about fertility. So the first port of call for the average person is their GP. And GPs, unless they've chosen to specifically subspecialize in women's health, and even then, usually that's breast health, urinary health, women mental health, that it's not necessarily fertility, but in general, GPs don't know much about fertility. Secondly, that there are lots of different ways of doing IVF. There's no one clear way. There's no one clear best clinic. There's no one clear best product. There's no one specific recipe that's going to make your IVF work. And the third thing I learned was that IVF is massively big business. So not only from the perspective of the clinics, but from the perspective of the companies providing the products to those clinics, and there are hundreds of them, and they're all vying and jostling to have the best product that they're going to sell to the most clinics. And then in conjunction with that, there's a whole swathe of people who are trying to provide all of the extra support and education and information that isn't available within the clinic. And some of them are doing that. It's completely unregulated. And a lot of those people who are doing that are people with a lived experience of IVF. Maybe they had 1 or 2 cycles themselves. They're really good at marketing. So now they set themselves up as a fertility coach, or for want of a better term, something like that. And that standing to earn a lot of money from people too. So it's this massive industry that's massively big business. And I really felt the need to want to go back to really legitimately helping people. When I started my training, IVF was not for profit. Any profits generated went straight back into research, and I wanted to go back to that. So unfortunately, I can't pay, for my daughter's ballet lessons, or pay my power bills through not-for-profit, but that's why I set up what I'm doing. That was kind of a long way of getting to it, but it's really about going back to actually helping people to navigate this very big business and to understand all of the different bits and pieces that might be able to help them achieve their goal more quickly.
Yes, and that is exactly why I thought it would be great to speak to you in more detail, because here in the UK, there is now a huge private industry around IVF. We obviously have our treatment within the NHS, which is free, but people's ability to access that has become increasingly difficult, especially that I've seen it in the last 10 years I've been working in this field. And so what has happened is there's been this huge explosion in the private side of IVF, and there is very little chat about what that actually means for the person going into it. So what do you see as the kind of problem that is faced for people because of this kind of explosion and this sort of business side of IVF and treatment?
I think it's kind of twofold. I think we don't want to lay all the blame at the feet of the IVF clinics, because some people do need IVF, and IVF is amazing. And these clinics are filled with amazing nurses and scientists and doctors and wonderful things that people can do to overcome all sorts of problems. So we don't want to lay the blame at IVF clinics per se, but I think we have to also think culturally as a culture, and I mean that humankind, we've got very used to having solutions for everything, or being able to find answers to everything. And we don't want to spend 6 months finding the answer. We want the answer today. And so, and we're used to having a pocket full of 400 encyclopedias every time we want anything. And I mean, 20 years ago when I started my training, or 24 years ago, it's getting longer and longer ago, if you wanted to know more about what your doctor was suggesting, whether it was a hip replacement or a knee replacement or IVF, you actually had to go to a university library and know how to research university publications in order to find more information. So you just didn't bother. You took the information your doctor said. So doctors could very easily say, no, I don't think you're ready for treatment yet. I think we need to do X, Y, and Z first, and then that. And then we'll move to IVF. But these days, if a doctor says that to a patient, they go, piffle puffle to you, I've read on Google, blah, 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 and they go to another doctor. And then they go to another doctor, and they go to another doctor. And, so I think it's twofold. I think there are two sides to this problem. One is that we want these answers right now, straight away. And if you're not going to give it to me, I'll go and find someone who will. And on the other side, we've got people going, okay, well, fine, I will give you the answer then, if that's what you want. And so then they're being raced into IVF possibly more quickly than maybe even the doctor wants them to be. And of course, that opens the door for unethical behaviour and people, getting into these industries for all the wrong reasons. That there's in Melbourne, in the city where I'm most familiar with all of the fertility specialists, there are 95 fertility specialists in a city with a population of I think it's up to 3 or 4 million people now. That's a lot of fertility specialists. So the industry is exploding, and it's doing it worldwide, mostly because people want answers now. If they're not getting pregnant, they want to see the doctor and they want to have IVF now.
And so what can you do about that? Because how can you make sure that people are not rushing into IVF, or they're having unnecessary treatment, or they're being sold unnecessary testings or investigations? How can people kind of stop that? Because it feels certainly when we see people in clinic it feels very difficult to have an objective oversight into all the different options that are out there. And what we see in clinic is that, exactly like you said, there are many different ways to do IVF, and there are many different consultants, there are many different opinions. And so for a person going through it, how can you navigate all of that information and all of those options? How do you know what's right for you and what isn't right for you?
I don't know the answer to that, which is why I started my business, because I feel like everybody needs to see someone like me who's independent and is a science educator, who has the ability to say, okay, here's an analogy to describe that really complex thing. Let me hyper simplify it to this really easy to understand little analogy so that you get some picture of what you're actually doing, so you can really make an informed choice about what you want to do next. What I work with my clients with is that science education, the stuff that's missing from high school. We go through high school learning how not to get pregnant, and we have very little comprehension of how our bodies actually work. We just know how to put a condom on a banana, which turns out it's not that helpful. I've never had to do it. Not that great. But I think so a lot of what I do with my clients is that education side of things first, all the stuff that's missing from their education, so that they have some knowledge around that. And I tend to, everything I talk about is very backed with science and studies and articles that are published and peer reviewed and all that kind of thing. I talk a lot about preconception health, regardless of how you're planning to conceive. Preconception health is paramount, and we know this. We've known this for a long time. It's been published over and over and over again that your health in the 3 months before conception is super important, not just for your chances of conception, but for the ongoing health of the pregnancy and the health of the baby at the end. So I guess that's where I try to come at it from, less from the point of taking down the doctor, more from the point of saying, okay, yeah, sure, let's do IVF. Absolutely. I'm on board. We'll do IVF, but we're going to do it in 3 months' time.
Yes.
And in those 3 months, we're going to talk about all the things that we need to do to prepare the raw materials for that conception. And maybe we might end up at that first appointment in 3 months' time already pregnant. Woohoo! How amazing would that be? If we don't, we haven't lost anything. We're ready to roll, and we've not wasted those cycles doing IVF unnecessarily, where we were unprepared.
Yeah. I mean, as you know, in our practice, that's what we talk about a lot, is this idea of preconception health and the 3 months to prepare and to make all those changes and do investigations, because I don't know what it's like where you are, but over here sometimes it feels like people go into treatment without having proper, thorough investigations for both partners. Is it similar over there?
Very similar. Usually the GP will do a range of investigations. Then the fertility doctor will do another range of investigations. The ones that the GPs do are usually baseline hormone tests, health screening, like, things, rubella, and, things we want to know that you need to deal with before you get pregnant. But I mean, depending on which fertility specialist you see, there can be various things that are missed. I'm not huge on that stuff because I'm not a doctor. I'm not a Chinese medicine practitioner. I don't know any of that stuff, but I do say, at the very, very least, we need to make sure we're eating healthily and cleaning up, nurture, nourish, protect is what I say. But that we're reducing our exposure to the endocrine disrupting chemicals and eating well and doing all those things. And our bodies can pretty much do everything else the way they're supposed to. And mostly that work will fix any of the other imbalances or investigations that are wrong. If we do a test and see that vitamin B12 is out of whack or whatever, that's going to be corrected by 3 months of diet and lifestyle help anyway. So there's not a lot of point doing the test. But as when it comes to male fertility, what I see all the time is fertility specialists, they call themselves in Australia. So in Australia, the word fertility specialist is not a protected word. So title, pretty much anyone could call themselves a fertility. I could call myself a fertility specialist if I wanted to. Anecdotally, it's reserved for gynecologists and obstetricians who have chosen to specialise in fertility, but they don't actually have to do any extra study or anything in order to call themselves a fertility specialist. And a lot of those fertility specialists will then call themselves a male fertility specialist, just because they can write the words ICSI on a plan sheet.
Mm.
Right, you get my drift. Someone comes in, oh, your semen analysis is not quite right. That's okay. We'll just do IVF with ICSI. Let's get started next month. And I say, hold up, problem with the semen analysis. Why? Why is there a problem with the semen analysis? Well, let's investigate that first. Oh, but the doctor said we should just do IVF with ICSI. Okay, probably that might work. But also, maybe you could save yourself $10,000, and maybe you could save yourself the drama of IVF if we just spend a couple of months working on things we know are going to improve semen parameters, and maybe then you'll conceive naturally. Who knows? Maybe. Let's try it.
So are these the things that you highlight to people when they come in and work with you? I presume you go through and do like a case history and sort of pick out where there might be gaps of information?
Yes and no. I tend to... I don't do great big blocks of consultations or anything like that. I tend to do a one-off consultation. People can then book a follow-up one if they want to. But what I try and get across in that 1 hour is there's a lot more to this than meets the eye. And you know, I always give them a copy of my ebook, which is Preparing for Conception, which has got... It's basically my handbook for any clients who do choose to do an ongoing support package. But a big thing I do with my between cycle review clients is go back to that beginning and pick apart, you know, how did we end up here? What happened to get you starting IVF in the first place? And what have you done so far? And how can we sort of backtrack on that and then work out where we want to go next?
And what do you say to people to help them choose which clinic to go to? Because, you know, it's the thing here is that often people, what I see is that people go to clinics based on having a friend who went to that clinic, or it's the clinic that's nearest to them, so it's the most convenient clinic, both of which are, perfectly legitimate reasons. But it's sometimes difficult for, and people make those decisions because it's so difficult and so overwhelming to look at clinics and make a choice, because you look at stats and you're like, well, you can't compare like for like, and what do the stats mean? And, you know, every clinic says that they're the best and they do that, you know. So what advice can you give to people who are in that situation of trying to choose a clinic, and how do you go about it?
Look, this one is so fraught and so challenging, and it's why I set up my Help Me Choose a Specialist service, but I so far only do that one in Melbourne, because I'm just not across the other specialists enough. In my Help Me Choose a Specialist service, I always ask people where they live and how far they're prepared to travel. I ask them if they want a male or female specialist. I ask them if they want someone who specialises only in fertility, or if they do obstetrics and gynecology as well. And ask if they have any pre-existing conditions. I think I usually help people to choose the clinic first and then the specialist within that clinic, because I think there's a whole lot of factors that people don't want to take into account when they're choosing a clinic. Like when you phone up the clinic, is there a gatekeeper who answers the phone who's a bit snarky and a bit grumpy? And that's going to put you off all the time. And that's going to set your adrenaline levels up here every time you make a phone call to the clinic. We don't want that. Discount that. Is there easy parking? Is it easy to get to from work and from home and all that? Because that's all going to factor in across the long term. And then how easy is it to contact your specialist? Can you, if you've got a question, can you send them an email? Can you send them a text message? Do they have a lovely nurse that you can ring and get the information easily through that way? How easy is it to access that kind of information? And then the success rate data is really contentious, and lots of people will start there. I find that challenging because I know from the science side of things that there's an awful lot of people who are pushed into certain types of treatment, like, for example, push to go for blastocyst culture, for example, and then they don't end up with the transfer, so they don't become part of the statistics. So, if you choose a clinic that only does blastocyst transfer and never does anything other than that, then their success rates are going to be better. But there's also going to be a whole lot of people who don't end up with the transfer at all. If you have, clinics can have different thresholds below which the embryo grade, they won't freeze or transfer an embryo below that grade. Yet I've got a friend who's an embryologist in a clinic in Sydney that doesn't have a grade. They just transfer pretty much everything. Wow. And freeze pretty much everything, which means that their published success rates are terrible. But they had 17 babies born in the year of 2022 that would not have been born if those embryos were grown in any other lab in Sydney, because they would have been discarded. That's 17 families that got a baby from an embryo that would have been discarded in other clinics. So there's a lot of things to take into account, and it's very, very difficult. I would say to anyone who's struggling to work out where to go, definitely take friends' advice. It's really important to know that your friends had a good experience there, not just your friends who got babies, because those people are always going to have a skewed opinion of where they had their treatment, but also your friends who didn't get babies but had a reasonable experience at the clinic and felt that they were listened to and that they were respected and that they had good access to their doctor. I would also encourage them, as I said, to think about where the clinic is and how easy it is to get to and how easy it is to contact people and all of those things that I said before. And, of course, you can't discount the success rates to a certain extent, but don't use that as your primary marker.
Yeah. And what about for people when treatment hasn't worked, when they've been at a clinic, they've spent their money, it hasn't been successful. How do people navigate what to do next from there?
Come and do a between cycle review with me and understand it, or ask your doctor. So go back to your doctor and say, okay, let's look at this information. Why didn't this work? Is there anything we can learn from that? Is there anything we need to do differently next time? But also remember that this is really an exact science. Even though it's science, you got to have your knee replaced. You expect to be able to walk on your knee within 2 weeks. You got to have fertility treatment. It might not work. Maybe it's never going to work. We don't know. And so there are going to be lots of times where it doesn't work. Statistically speaking, it's going to not work more often than it does, because that's just how it is. So just because it didn't work doesn't mean we suddenly have to change everything and change specialists, and maybe we actually do just need to do exactly the same thing again. It's literally the only space I can think of where repeatedly doing the same thing is not a sign of insanity. Maybe it's actually what we need to do. We just need to get all the numbers up. And of course, it depends on multiple factors. If you're 42 and you're only getting 2 eggs collected and 1 embryo to transfer, you're going to need to keep banging away at that for a long time. And the 1 embryo you get might not implant, but you might need 10 embryos before you get an embryo that will implant. Whereas if you're 35 and you're routinely producing 10 embryos and you've had 10 embryos transferred and you still haven't had a successful pregnancy, maybe there's a little bit more we need to look at there. So it really is different on a case-by-case basis, and important to have that between cycle review consultation, either with your specialist or with an independent expert who can help you to understand what happened and what your options are.
And so if you were, like in your work on a day-to-day basis, what's the kind of one thing that you wish people knew or that you wish people did more before they went into treatment?
One thing, gosh, there's a million, Hannah.
All right, give us 3.
No, I really wish people just press the pause button for a minute and weren't quite so quick to jump in. And I think, as I said right at the beginning, this is driven by both the doctors and the patients. It's not just the doctors saying you need to do IVF now. It's the patient saying, you know what, I've been trying for 2 years. I need to just start it now, right now. Don't care, now. And what I really want people to do is just press pause for a minute and prepare themselves. And I think there are I think I recorded a reel the other day with 5 really important things people should think about. And I can't even remember exactly what they are now, but you need to think about whether you've chosen a great specialist and a great clinic and you're comfortable with them, because once you start your cycle, gloves are off, you just need to trust them and do what they do. You know, it's like packing a backpack and now you're on the trek and you've just got to follow the trek master until you get there. And if it doesn't work, then you unpack your backpack and you repack it. So make sure you love and trust your specialist and your clinic. Make sure you've gathered your support crew around you. You know who you want to talk to, who you want to share this with. Set the boundaries with your partner. So have those difficult conversations with your partner about, you know, are we going to tell your mum or my auntie or your cousin, or who's going to know that we're having this treatment? Who's likely to ambush me at the Christmas party because they know what's going on? And am I comfortable with that? So we set the boundaries around who we discuss this with. We make sure we've done all the preparation work, both male and female, when it comes to preparing the raw materials. We've checked out workplace and we know we can get a bit of flexible time around work. And we've planned a whole lot of really nice things to do during that time. You know, we're going out for dinner with some girlfriends and we're going to go to the movies and we're going to go to the garden show, or, you know, lovely things that fill up our serotonin and our dopamine and make us feel good. Buy ourselves a new book or a new notebook or a new, you know, something that makes you feel good.
Yeah, that's great. That's great 5 top tips. So Lucy, am I right? You do online. I mean, obviously you're in Australia, but you do everything online. Yeah. So
I do it all online. So I do one-on-one consultations. They're kind of tricky to book at the moment because they're sort of booking out really a long way in advance at the moment. But I do between cycle review, which is online as well. So that's a bunch of 3 appointments. One appointment where we just sit and go through everything. And then the next one I go, righty-ho, here's the plan. This is what I've looked at. I've drilled down into it. I've done some research. I've, you know, pulled some data. This is what this is, you know, what we're going to do. And then a follow-up after that. But I also have a couple of online programs that people can do in their own time. So I have 2 of those, or actually I have 4 of those, but 2 important ones. One is IVF WTF. I'm Australian. I can't help myself, but it is exactly what it stands for. So often when people are faced with IVF, they go, what the? And I'm like, yep, exactly. That's what this program is. That program is huge now. It's got really big, but you can dip in and out of whatever bits you want as you need them. It starts with preparation for conception. So there's preparing the body, preparing the mind. There's an interview with Melanie Brown, who's the nutritionist from London, who's really focused on sperm preparation for conception. There's a whole lot of preparation for conception stuff. Then there's actually what is happening in an IVF cycle. How do they do the egg collection? How do they know when to do the egg collection? How do they stimulate the ovaries? Where do they get the eggs from? What happens to the eggs after they're collected? Fertilization, development, all of that stuff. There's videos, explainers about the entire process of IVF. And then there's donation and surrogacy resource guide. There's a miscarriage resource guide. There's meditations. There's an EFT tapping workshop and ebook. There's a dietitian workshop and ebook.
Wow. There's a lot.
It's huge. It's massive. And I've kept it really low price because I mean, it should be thousands of dollars more than it is, but I know IVF's already expensive enough and I want people to have this information. I have had people come back to me and say, I nearly didn't buy it because it was too cheap and I didn't think it would be any good. So there's that.
Yeah.
But that program is there. People can dip in and out of that as they want. If they want to add on to that, they can then add on a monthly subscription with live Q&A sessions with me. So if they have extra questions and stuff, they can do that. So that's one program. The other one is the Detox WTF program, which is just helping people with the overwhelm of the whole toxins and fertility conversation. What are these toxins? Is this a real thing? Who do I believe? Should I follow that random person on TikTok that I saw? Do I really need to do a 3-day detox and not eat for 24 hours or 48 hours? I saw someone doing a 96-hour detox the other day. I was like, oh my God, what are we doing?
It's a lot.
It's a lot. So those 2 programs are there. So all of my stuff is available online. Some of it's much more contact than others.
Great. Well, I will put all those details in the notes for this podcast episode so people can access them. And obviously your Lucy Lines on Instagram.
I'm Two Lines Fertility on Instagram.
Two Lines Fertility on Instagram.
Yeah.
So I will also link your Instagram account because I know you have you put out loads of really good posts, which is how I found you in the first place. So
amazing. I love that.
I will put all that information on there. And I just want to say thank you so much for giving us your time today, Lucy. We really, really appreciate it. I know you're really busy, so thank you.
And my absolute pleasure, Hannah. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, everybody, I hope you found this helpful and we will see you next time. If you've enjoyed listening to this and want to find out more, then come and join my free community in Facebook. We have loads of resources. You can catch up on all our previous webinars and be the first to know about forthcoming events. To sign up, just follow the link in the show notes. And if you'd like to work one-to-one with myself or one of the team, then please see our website, hannahpern.com, where you can book in directly or organise a discovery call to find out how we can support your fertility and your reproductive health.